Welcome to another program in our series, Freethinking Forum. I'm Bill Weir, the producer and host, and I'm delighted to have with me today Jane Leonard.
Thank you.
The president of Growth and Justice.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, I've been aware of Growth and Justice for many years when Dane Smith was the head of it, and you now keep him around as a senior
Senior fellow,
Fellow?
And past or president emeritus. Yes.
Oh, good.
Yeah, he's very busy.
And
Yep.
and I sense from talking with him recently that he's still very wise.
He's very wise. He's very active, and it's his birthday.
Oh, today, yes.
So, but I'm sure he would love to join us on a later show.
Well, let's plan for that.
Okay.
Good.
Yeah.
Now, what brought you to Growth and Justice?
Well, I have worked in community and rural and economic development for more decades, I guess, than I care to admit. And I've always worked to try to bring business and community together. And Growth and Justice is really what that's about, is to support business growth and social justice.
Sounds like a perfect fit.
You know, it really is. I feel like I've worked all my life to get to this point and this place, and it's just a delight every day to work with our staff and
Yeah.
Dane, and yeah.
Good. And next to you, there's a map.
Yes.
One Minnesota Equity Blueprint.
Right. Yes.
You want to tell us about that?
Sure. This is just one of many pieces that we've put together to illustrate the One Minnesota Equity Blueprint, which we have just premiered, so to speak.
Yesterday.
Yesterday we had a press conference both in St. Paul and St. Cloud. And the One Minnesota Equity Blueprint is a result of a pretty long process of community engagement over the last 6 months, very intensely. And then Growth and Justice has been working on rural equity projects for probably the last 2 years. And so when I came on board, even though I'd been working in rural development, I said, you know, we really need to broaden this out to rural and urban together. And that's really where this came from, is rural and urban together, thriving by design, because we can work together as people across the state. Like our new governor and the One Minnesota vision, the One Minnesota Equity Blueprint has been in the works for, I would say, at least 2 years, but certainly in the last 6 months is when we've really gone out across the state and asked people about their opinions, their recommendations in terms of how do we help bridge those rural-urban gaps, how do we close the racial disparities, and also the environmental disparities. So.
And I see you have a booklet.
We do have a booklet, and
it's
it matches. June 27th.
Were you? This is part of the research process.
Yeah, this was our kickoff. We had a statewide gathering of about 150 people, and they represented. We were trying to get a representation of Minnesota in 2040, because that's about between 2030 and 2040 is when Minnesota is really sort of flipping to be a minority-majority state, much like Brooklyn Park is right now, actually as a city. So we had Susan Brower out. She's the state demographer. We held this event out in southwestern Minnesota, where they've been working on all sorts of coming together as one region for many, many years. And we had a number of people come, and this is what this booklet is kind of getting everybody up to speed about what's happening to our state right now, what we can do to try to build a prosperity that is for everybody and that's sustainable and is shared. So that's what was driving us, was the recognition really that instead of a divided state, we wanted to try to help build a one Minnesota, and this event kicked off the community engagement part of this project, and all the way up through many community meetings across the state in the fall, right up until yesterday when we had the press conferences and announced the legislative priorities. So.
Now, I came across, on your website, came across the word solutionaries.
Yes.
And
yes.
how can I get to be a solutionary?
Well, you can join the network, thrivingbydesign.mn.org.
I did that right away.
Yep, good. Okay, great. Thank you, Bill. The solutionaries comes from a term that we picked up from Tonya Allen, who's the president and CEO of the Skillman Foundation that's based in Detroit, Michigan. It's one of the, I would say, sort of a 3M foundation, if you will. The Skillmans were 3M people, and they are focusing primarily on educational equity. But we had Tonya come out and speak to the Brandel Lecture, which is a annual event at the Humphrey School, and she used that term, and she meant it to mean people, all of us, working together to not only solve our shared problems, but also take advantage of these opportunities that we have that are out there if we can just work together to gain them. So.
Well, reaching out for a more complete solution.
Yeah, more.
That serves everybody.
That serves everybody, yeah. And one of the difficult things about this project is that we are not talking about one issue or two issues or one opportunity or two opportunities. We're trying to help show how things are interrelated. And so if you're talking about economic development, you also need to be talking about education. And if you're talking about childcare and transportation, particularly as a community that's trying to retain talent or attract talent, you also need to be talking about housing, transportation, and childcare. They're all related. And so that's part of Growth and Justice's mission as well, is to really help see that bigger picture. One of the organizations that I want to make sure to mention is our partner in this, which is onemn.org, which is there's their, you probably can't see it on the screen here, but their logo, onemn.org. They were started about the same time as Growth and Justice. And they are an organization primarily representing people of color that have been concerned and continue to be concerned about the fairness and equity in terms of business development among communities of color and Native American communities. And so about a year ago, we reached out to them and said, will you do this project with us? And they said yes. And so all this past year, we have had a partnership with them, and we've also added other partners along the way. But the solutionaries, to me, going back to your original question, are all of us, citizens, community members, Minnesotans, whether we live here or work here, whether we were born here or not. We are all part of the solution, and this project kind of pulls all of us together. And in fact, we collected over 600 different ideas and recommendations across the state from this process. And that's what was distilled down into the priorities and the blueprint that we talked about yesterday.
Well, I'll look forward to reading the 600 another
we can
time.
send you the list.
Meantime, could you give us the highlights?
Sure enough, you bet. Yeah, as I said, we kicked this off with a just across the state gathering. We had about 15 community meetings that collected, probably another 200, 300 some people across the state. And there were distilled down from those 600 recommendations were about 90 different issue areas, and we can't really list those here today, but they are all going to be featured in the blueprint. And what I wanted to highlight is something we highlighted yesterday, that really there's 3 key themes that are part of these priorities.
What are the 3?
The 3 are a persistent concern and a focus on rural-urban interdependency. Some folks think that, well, greater Minnesota or the suburbs, for example, don't necessarily relate to the urban areas or what have you. And we have seen both empirical evidence and certainly anecdotal evidence that there's strong interdependency, and we want to build on that. A second area is a high priority on racial equity and other aspects of social justice. And this map, if we can turn to it again, really points out the income inequality. So the
dark red?
The dark red is where kids are over 75% of the kids in these school districts, the very dark red, are eligible for free or reduced lunches, which is really a kind of indication of the economic problems. Thank you. That these families are facing, and the inequities across the state. And you can see here in the metro area, excuse me, that there are certainly red areas here too. So there's one Minnesota in both our solutions and our challenges. Many of the challenges are shared across the state. And again, this is one example.
What I notice is that the ring around the metro area has the pink, which is indicative of
less,
only 1% to
25%. Right, and so you can see that some of the more inner city and inner suburbs are experiencing some of the same economic stress as areas of greater Minnesota outside the metro area. So we use these maps to tell a story. They will be part of the larger blueprint as well. But we wanted to use this, particularly yesterday, just to show both the challenges and the opportunities that we have here. So that is a second key theme, is the high priority on racial equity and other aspects of social justice like income inequality. And then a third area that Growth and Justice and others have been working on for a long time is a stronger integration of climate action with equity.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, in all aspects of policymaking.
There we have to team up with the rest of the world,
We have to team up with the rest of the world. And I think, one of the reasons, and I don't know if you can see it on the map here, but you'll notice that there are different colors on this map too.
Yeah.
And these are the biomes of Minnesota. And
is it 3 biomes?
There's 4, actually.
4.
There's the prairie here on the west,
yeah.
the deciduous forest, the trees that lose their leaves going right up the middle diagonally. There's the pine area here. And then the coniferous forest that doesn't lose its needles. And then up here is the aspen parklands, which a lot of people don't know is a unique biome that stretches all the way up into Canada and towards the Arctic Circle. Minnesota is unique in the continent, actually, in that we have the 4 major biomes coming together right in our state, right on top of the Mississippi River and the watersheds. Here, we have to be stewards of the environment, not only for our state, but for our continent and for the world. And then if you add, all the fresh water that's here and the concerns about its health.
Flowing in all directions.
Flowing in all directions, exactly. You're right. I mean, they go to the Hudson Bay, to the Gulf, obviously, with the Mississippi, but even out to the Pacific and then the Atlantic. So Minnesota is unique in the states, and so I think we have an extra challenge, but also really part of our stewardship of our larger community, the Minnesota community. So yeah.
Well, those are three huge
They're huge. Yep.
efforts that,
Yeah.
and you're suggesting by this we can thrive
Yes.
by
Yes.
design,
Right.
addressing those three.
Those are the kind of three major buckets, and then, as I said, we kind of distilled the 600 some recommendations down to 80 or 90 different areas, and they run the gamut from economic development and entrepreneurship to infrastructure. Minnesota has a lot of infrastructure challenges, and democracy and civic engagement. That's a whole other bucket, if you will, which is key to achieving a lot of what we want to achieve. But I've always been an optimist. I think that we have the resources, both our human resources and our resourcefulness, shall we say, to build together a future where every Minnesotan has the opportunity to succeed regardless of race, regardless of geography, regardless of gender, and to share in that success. And that's why this is built around the idea that equity is really the superior growth strategy. And equity is such a great word because it means economic equity, the kind of equity that you and I might have in our homes if we own them, and also social equity, that we not only should be, can be, but need to be responsible for our communities and for one another, and to share in, to have a fair playing field. And I go back to equity, particularly around home ownership, and that's one of the really telling pieces of data that I believe it's a huge difference in
between white homeownership and
exactly,
black.
and people of color and African Americans in particular. I think there's about 76% home ownership in the white population, and maybe 40% for across all people of color. But then if you keep dismantling that data, it just seems to get worse and worse. And home ownership is such a huge part of net worth, and so when you don't have that, you're really starting way behind the starting gate. So,
yeah. And education, and this map focuses on school districts.
yes, it does, and that is another key piece. We have a whole chapter on education, on cradle to career pathways, which is something that Growth and Justice and other partners have worked on for, again, many years. The education partnership coalitions that are now growing across the state, which see education as part and parcel of community and lifelong learning. I was at a meeting earlier last week with Neil Kashkari, the Federal Reserve Bank head here in the Minneapolis branch or the district, and he said, economic growth is really a math problem. we need to increase productivity, and we need to increase the number of people, and people that are educated and ready for the workforce. And in Minnesota, because we are in the middle of the North American continent, sometimes it can be hard to attract people, but we need to, because we need everybody we can get to continue the path of economic growth, of sustainable economic growth that we'd like to see for our state and for our communities.
Well, we have a lot more than you might expect of corporate headquarters here.
Yeah, I think people would be surprised at how many Fortune 500 companies are here. I just drove past Medtronic to get here, and other companies that were actually started here in Minnesota. And that's another thing that we discussed yesterday at the press conference, that we need to help encourage more entrepreneurship, more invention, more innovation. And Minnesota has always had that knack, I think, in part because we've put so much onus on education and on resourcefulness, because we are a cold, dark place for much of the year, and
but we have skyways.
We have skyways. There's another invention right there. So and the mall, Southdale Mall, right? That was the first mall in the United States.
And now the Mall of America.
And now the Mall of America, right? There's all sorts of ways that we've innovated and
we've tamed the winter.
We've tamed the winter, and we enjoy the winter. If we had some, if there was a little more snow, I'd be out there skiing. So,
right.
Yeah. We have a lot to build on here, and that's really another thing that the One Minnesota Equity Blueprint grabs hold of, is that we have so much talent in this state. One of the things that inspired me to work on this with even more fervor was a report back in 2014 by PolicyLink on Minnesota's Tomorrow. Equity is the smart growth strategy. And in that report, they said that our economic growth would have been $16.1 or $2 billion, that's with a B, more if there had been more people of color in the economy. And I just thought, wow, we need everybody. Let's do whatever we can to
how come
open this equity.
Just discrimination, racial discrimination?
Probably some of that, yes, and the lack of capital for small business creation. That's one of the things that our partner 1mn.org has been working on for many years, is how do you attract capital for small business development. And small business of all stripes, I think, face that because a lot of our economic development policy is geared towards larger businesses, and most of the jobs are created by small business. So that's
Indeed.
where we need to go.
I've had some experience in this area.
I bet you have.
I chaired the Minnesota Entrepreneurs Club.
Well, there you go. Yes.
When Bill Norris encouraged us to set it up.
Okay. Yeah.
But and I'm now part of the Minnesota Futurists that focus on how do we get to a preferred future.
Right.
There are plenty of possibilities, and we can pick out what's preferred, maybe several that are probable, but we have to really be careful.
Thriving by design,
directing
being more
us
intentional.
To the preferred, yes.
Yeah. If I could just maybe jump in there with a little side note. Before I took the job at Growth and Justice, I was the state broadband grant administrator, and so helped put out all that state money to make sure that high-speed broadband was farther out in the state, and that people and businesses could be connected at speeds and capacity that would help them with education, with healthcare, with government, and with business. And I just have to say, I was so inspired as those connections were made, that small business just literally kind of came out of the woodwork, or the basement, or the garage.
Not out of the woodwork.
Not out of the woodwork, out of the garage, because of that access now to national and world markets and resources. And that's a thing that we tend to think of broadband as recipients, as
bringing
consumers.
more entertainment.
Bringing more entertainment, right.
But it's very important in business.
To be a producer, to be a creator, and you need higher speed broadband to do that. So, and that's, I think, when you talk about a preferred future or a probable future, my bet is on if we can help people make better use of the broadband that we have and keep growing that, the sky's the limit. So,
Good.
yeah.
You're into so many things that I have been aware of slightly, but not seen the kind of collaboration
Yeah.
that's needed.
Yes, and that is, like I said earlier, it can be hard to wrap your arms around because people have often said to us, well, aren't you trying to boil the ocean? So many issues. But it does go back to all those interconnections. And I think when we had the very first kickoff conference in Granite Falls Upper Sioux community in June that you mentioned earlier, that was one of the most important things, is that people were able to connect to other people that they might not normally have done. Because we tend to be siloed into certain things or issues. And, I'm a community development person, so I often go to community development conferences. I do try to go to conferences where they talk about more than one thing. But if you're in healthcare or if you're in a certain business, you may not get to talk to people from other disciplines very often. And that's really where innovation comes from, is that diversity of ideas, diversity of people, diversity of solutions. So, yeah.
Now we're down to about 2 minutes.
Okay.
How could you encourage people who are listening to take their part in
Take
this?
their part. Well,
Number one, I guess, is go to the website.
our website. We do have a special website for this. It's www.thrivingbydesignmn.org. And I think maybe you'll have it on the end of the show here, hopefully.
Yes.
And if you go to that website, there's an assortment of resources. There's an assortment of ways that you can get involved. All of the, as my staff likes to remind me, everything is open source. So if you've got ideas, send them. Check out the ideas that have already been shared. We do plan to go back out to the communities that were a part of this gathering of ideas, and other communities as well, as the year continues here, so that we can continue to check in about the priorities, but then also about the larger blueprint. Because we think not only state legislature needs to think about these things, but communities where the ideas come from, how can we help them integrate these ideas and, as you point out so aptly, get to a preferred future versus a probable one.
Yeah.
So,
Well, 2 weeks from today, the majority leader of the House will be here.
that's great. That's
And
right.
I may record 2 half hours with
Okay.
him. So I may devote one of those half hours to this.
Well, and we have shared all of this with the legislative leadership. Just did that yesterday
Good.
when we were out for the press conference. So
Thank you so
thank
much.
you so much, Bill.
Yes,
Yeah.
this has been very informative and
Thank you.
encouraging.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you for tuning in as well.